Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive overeating and bulimia. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be catching a plane to Newark, New Jersey this afternoon, where hopefully I will see a lot of you in person. Melissa and I are heads of the greeters committee, so we'll probably be around the registration table a lot. And if you're going to be there and want to volunteer to be a backup greeter in case someone doesn't make it because of flights or like unfortunately one of my sponsees got COVID, shoot me a text and we'll keep you as a backup. If not, just find us and come and say hi. So last week I talked about resolving resentments, the way it's laid out in the big book. And one of the perks of us not being affiliated with Overeaters Anonymous or any other group officially is that like we could do what we want. We could bring in outside literature. We could talk about what we want. I suppose we could talk about crocheting and knitting if we wanted, but we don't want to. We always want to talk about recovery stuff. So at one point I just did a search on some materials on forgiveness. And last week, some people said they would like to hear it. So just again, if you're new at Recovery Jam and you're saying, she's quoting some outside literature, we are not OA. We can quote what we want. But again, the goal is to be helpful so that we can all forgive. And if you think about it, in the chapter 6, it talks about when you're doing your prayer and meditation, it says, go to your priest, minister, and rabbi to get some helpful suggestions. So here are, I'm not a priest, minister, or rabbi, but I hope that some of these will be helpful suggestions. So remember, on page 66 of the big book, it tells us that resentments are fatal. They lead to our death, really, because they cut us off from the sunlight of the spirit. Remember, our only solution is a spiritual experience. So imagine like, here's me, here's God. And the big book says resentments cut me off from the sunlight of the spirit, like a steel trap door. Like imagine a plant being cut off from the sunlight, it would die. So the big book then goes on to tell us how to get rid of resentments. And we covered this last week. We went through the section on resentments and how it works. But I thought I'd just share some, here's my alliteration, random remarks on resolving resentments, otherwise known as forgiveness. So how can we as addicts do it? So I have listed 10 points that I have mashed together, both mainly from the big book and also from the book, The Way to Power and Poise by E. Stanley Jones. And he is someone whose work was studied by the founders of AA and clearly incorporated into the big book. I've read lots of his books and I personally like them. By the way, people sometimes ask, what can I read like for my spiritual reading? And I say, go look at what the founders of AA read and studied. That's a great place to start. So number one, look at why we're angry, right? So we all do the check marks when we do our resentment list as to what's affected, and that's generally the easiest column to fill out. But it deserves some thought because really the basis of most resentment, according to E. Stanley Jones, is a touchy, unsurrendered self. The fact that I have a resentment shows that there's a self, part of me, that's oversensitive because my will has not been fully surrendered to the will of God. And this is what he says. When surrendered to the will of God, we throw off resentments as healthy skin throws off disease germs. Unless there is a cut in the skin, the disease germs don't get in. So I started thinking about this with respect to like that third column in our resentment list, where we fill out like self-esteem, security. And I thought about it like self-esteem. I haven't surrendered to God the demand that others think about me in a certain way. If I had, it wouldn't bother me so much what other people said or thought about me. Ambitions. If I fully surrendered, let's say my career to God, for example, then it wouldn't matter so much if someone else got that promotion and not me. I would know that, like it says on page 63 of the big book, we had a new employer. employer with a capital E, meaning God, who provides all I need if I stay close to him and perform his work well. So I was working at a law firm a number of years ago, and they had this kind of policy, or they wanted me to join an organization that had values that I didn't agree with. So I didn't join and I got fired. Um, and then I got another job working in court management, but it paid, I think, $15,000 a year less than what I was making. But like, I'm okay. I'm like surrendering my career, doing what I think God wants. And right then, my parents called me and told me that as part of their estate planning, they were going to gift me $18,000 a year. So I have to remember that God is always my source. So I was used to thinking, well, all my money is going to come from my job. But if God's my employer, he's over everything. So he decided some of your money is going to come from your job and some's going to come from another channel. He's the employer. He could do whatever he wants. So remember, step 4 comes after step 3 for a reason. I have the courage to do this painful moral inventory and look at my ambition and my self-esteem and how it's part of my unsurrendered self. Because by this point, I believe in a God who's all loving, all powerful, who cares about me, right? By this point, I know God's got my back. And it's the same with my personal relations, sex relations, and security. Basically, if something or someone threatens my personal relations, my sex relations, or my security, I look to see where I haven't fully surrendered my right to something. So let's say I get angry because I got a bad health diagnosis. I haven't fully surrendered God's right to do whatever he wants with my health, with my life. So these are sometimes hard things to do, but our resentments show us where we haven't fully surrendered. Think about it. If like a little kid who we don't know walks up to us and says like, you're stupid, we won't care. Why? Because it doesn't matter. What if we could be like that with everyone? Thinking as long as I live the way God wants me to, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks or says about me. Okay, remember, I qualified this by saying this is the basis of most resentments and that there's parts of ourself that aren't completely surrendered. But let me be clear, if someone has violence committed against her, I would never tell the person her problem was lack of surrender. So let's like be careful. And if someone comes to us and says she was raped, let's say, well, you have an unsurrendered self. No, no. Again, common sense always. Number 2, the big book says realize that the other person is perhaps spiritually sick. I think this is one of the most overused and misused lines in the big book, right? I could probably label Mother Teresa as spiritually sick if she said something I didn't like and interfered with my little plans. But what about the times when someone isn't as spiritually developed as I would like? It's always helpful to look at their story, their upbringing. I mentioned last week that my dad yelled at us a lot when we were kids, and he worked a crazy amount of hours. But again, if I dig deep, walk a mile in his shoes, as they say, I remember my dad was physically abused by his dad, who didn't always have a job. So working 2 jobs and only yelling was major progress. And in God's eyes, my dad may be a saint. So it's helpful to remember before we say the other person is spiritually sick. I like to change it to they're spiritually developing just like me. And it's helpful to remember there's a little bit of good in the worst of us and a little bit of bad in the best of us. Here's a prayer that I find helpful. Lord, this person is an infinitely precious child of yours and a spiritually developing person with flaws, just like me. Please help me to relate to them with both truths in mind so that I can always love, always forgive, and if necessary, set appropriate boundaries. Okay. And also, forgiveness doesn't mean I have to be in a relationship with someone who is so spiritually sick or spiritually developing that they're abusive. If someone is abusive to me, I need to forgive on the basis that they're spiritually sick, right? I wouldn't expect a crippled man to walk. To expect someone who is very spiritually sick to behave like a spiritually healthy problem, well, that's kind of unfair. But I don't need to be in a relationship with that person. Okay. Forgiveness does not mean I always have to be in relationship. Okay. But number three, we never stop with saying that the other person is spiritually sick. Remember in the big book, after that, it says, we resolutely look for our part in the resentment. Our part is never just, this is a spiritually sick person and I need to pray for them. Okay, remember, I was advised to replace the term spiritually sick with spiritually developing or human, just like me. Otherwise, it's too easy for me to get spiritually up and say, well, I'll just pray for that poor spiritually sick person. But I have to really see my part. If someone was nasty to me, was I nasty to that person first? If one of my kids is undisciplined, is my part that I was selfish and lazy in teaching them the right things? If I'm angry at how other people are acting, is my part, I think I have a right to control how others think, what they do, or what they say? I have found that most of my resentments melt away when I see my part. And for me, my part is often that I just want other people to think, say, or do what I want them to. In other words, I'm playing God. If I have a resentment because people are thinking or talking badly about me, my part first is to say, did I do something to that person that would make them do that? Did I hurt them? And if not, I would say, I'm making what other people think or say about me my business. And so many of our resentments would go away if we realized that like most things aren't our business. So I picture it like I'm swimming, you know, in those big lap pools that have the markers that mark off the lanes. And my job is to keep swimming with my eye on God and his will for me. I cannot start swimming in other people's lanes, their business, or I cannot let other people swim into my lane, right? And try and, you know, control me. So here's an example from this week. So my daughter, who got married 6 weeks ago, told me this week that she and her husband, who work at the same place, they both quit their jobs and they didn't give notice because they don't have other jobs because they don't like the way that managers, you know, are. Nothing abusive, they just didn't like it. So, you know, I'm thinking, are you crazy? You've burnt your bridge. You can't use this place as a reference now, and you've worked there 3 years. You guys don't have jobs. But all I said was something to the effect of, oh, and then went on. She didn't ask my advice. I didn't give it. It is none of my business. Now, if she came to me and said, Mom, we need to move in with you because, you know, we can't pay our mortgage. Well, then I'd have to decide. And, you know, then I'd have a right to say, no, this is my lane. Go get a job. But the best advice I ever got from a therapist is once your children are older, you can't control them. All you could do is influence them. And the only way you can do that is to have a good relationship. So the way I keep my good relationship is I don't give unsolicited advice and I don't make their business my business. So I will tell you, I am 100% happy. And the fact that my daughter and her new husband quit their jobs with no notice, with nothing lined up, it does not affect my happiness one bit. Maybe it did for a few minutes. I talked to my husband, and we're like, okay, not our business. And then I just went about my life. What our kids do, what our friends do, what other people do is not our business. You know, one time I remember getting angry because my dad he'd be sitting there. I don't know if I told you all this story. He would be sitting in a room, and let's say he would have a muffin right in front of him, and my mom would be all the way across the house, and he would call, Gloria, can you come cut my muffin for me? I'm not kidding. And she would run from the other side of the house and cut his muffin or butter his or whatever it was. And then he would say, I love you, Gloria. And she would say, I love you, Sam. And I was like, I resent how my dad treats my mom. But obviously, I'm so wrong because she was as happy as could be with that. Just fun fact, I got married. The first time my husband had a cold, he's sitting in his chair, and I said, can I bring you some tea? Right? My mother raised me well. And he said, I have a cold, I'm not crippled. So he was used to doing things for himself. So now, when my husband is sick, I just say, if you need anything, let me know. So you see what other people do, how my parents had their relationship, unless he was abusing her. Someone might say that was abuse, calling her from the other side of the house. She was as happy as can be. Not my business. What my kids are doing, not my business. And you know what? This allows me to be really happy. Okay. So let's say we do all this and we still have the resentment. Is there anything else we can do? Yes. Number 4, we have to make up our minds that in this world, we are not going to escape injustice and pain. And I would add, dealing with insurance companies, dealing with utility companies. We're not going to escape it. We just have to recognize it. The big book talks about certain low spots and trials and tells us what to do when, not if, when trouble comes. And the big book doesn't say we will never have troubles. So if we believe that because we've given our lives to God, our lives going forward will be pain-free, we'll be guilty of like our old enemy expectations, and then we'll end up being so unfair to God. Something bad will happen, right? And then we'll say, oh, God's no good. But yet when like 100,000 good things happen to us, we never say, God is so great. God really gets the raw end of the deal when it comes to us humans because we blame him for everything bad, but we don't give him credit for everything good. So the big book tells us that when trouble comes, we cheerfully capitalize on them as a chance for God to show his omnipotence. That means we continue doing the right thing, we trust God, and we wait for the miracles. So, I don't, like I said, don't try and tell my kids what to do, but I do pray. I pray, God, like, make my son-in-law and my son like godly men, godly leaders. Make my daughter a godly woman. Let them build their lives around you. That's what I do. I surrender them to God. That's not doing nothing. That's doing something. So here's just a visualization that I do sometimes. I picture God on the throne, and I picture myself, and I take a rock. I picture myself painting on a rock. So it may be Lizzie and Anthony quitting their jobs. And I take that rock and I put it at God's feet. I am surrendering it not to a void in the universe. I am surrendering it to God. And then if I were to start worrying about it again, it's like, oh, I went to God's feet and picked up the rock. Let me put it back. And even if I have to put it back 50 times a day, that's okay. I'm surrendering it to God. Okay. Number 5, we can pray for those who harm us. So E. Stanley Jones says that by praying for those who wrong us, the resentment is sterilized by the antiseptic of prayer. He advises to pray first, as soon as we feel the first tinge of resentment. And this makes sense. Remember, if I try to do an inventory or I just call someone without bringing God into it, it's just psychology, and that doesn't work. And we'll know the freedom from bondage prayer on page 552, where we pray for other people to get whatever we want for ourselves. And that is hard. I mean, we're angry at someone who wronged us and say, God, please give them like good family relationships, a good marriage, all the financial security they need, health, a good relationship with you. And my heart may be saying, nope, nope, nope. But I feel like, God, please hear the prayer of my mouth, not the prayer of my heart in those occasions. And in that chapter, it tells us to do that for 2 weeks. I have never done it and within 2 weeks not have the resentment lift. But we have to be diligent about it. Number 6, we can go beyond prayer. So the big book says we ask God to show us how we can be helpful to the person who has hurt us. We can do good to those who hurt us. Can we bring in the garbage can of the neighbor who's like dog trampled our tulips? I remember when my son was living at home and he was a teenager and I was like angry at him because he was a handful. I would ask him, I'd say, okay, I'm going to get a coffee. Can I bring you one? Sometimes through gritted teeth, but I would make myself do it. And I can think of, it was from the movie and the book, The End of the Spear. It was about a group of missionaries who went to some place to do their missionary work. And as soon as they landed there, they were all killed. The people they were trying to help all killed them. Their wives went back when all these people who murdered their husband all had polio and ministered to them and took care of them. That's how I want to be able to forgive. Remember, in the chapter, The Family Afterwards, page 127, it says that we can help another person's crankiness disappear if we show love and spiritual understanding. Number 7, we can forgive because God has forgiven us. We can think about what God has done for us. It says, think of the 1,000 times a day he manifests his love and faithfulness to you. As you think of his love for you, a feeling of humble gratitude will spring up within you. As you experience gratitude to God for all he's done in your life, you'll realize that people around you need to be treated with love and patience, just as God has treated you. Since God has been so patient with you, how can you be critical and impatient toward others? God has patiently led you to a deeper understanding of his truth. He has waited for your lagging understanding and faltering faith to catch up. How will we respond to others whose understanding and faith are a bit behind? And that's all from Letters to a Troubled Church by Ray Stedman. What we are not to do. So the big book cautions me against harboring resentment. I always think that's an interesting word, harbor, right? It's like a place where a ship can be safe in a storm. How do I make myself a safe harbor for resentments so that anger and hate feel comfortable living in me? Okay, so this is what we are not to do. So we're not a safe harbor. We are not to review them over and over in our minds or review them over and over with other people under the guise of getting help or asking people to pray for the other person. When what we're really trying to do is get other people to agree with our perception that that other person is really a brat. We're building our harbor when we do that. The best thing is to tell one person, and ideally someone who doesn't know the person we resent, right? I usually tell Melissa, she's my nightly review partner, but if it's someone she knows, I might go to my sponsor instead, who doesn't go to the meetings I go to or travel in the same recovery circles. Sometimes we call someone before doing a resentment inventory, saying that we just need to vent. But one of my favorite spiritual authors says that if we're angry with someone, we don't need to vent, we need to repent. So before we call each other to talk about like lousy husbands or rotten kids or, cranky bosses, we need to pray and look for our part. Number 9, we avoid retaliation and argument. The big book makes it clear that avoiding retaliation is an essential ingredient in the cocktail of forgiveness. When someone wrongs us, there's this absolutely unavoidable sense that the person owes us, like they've incurred a debt. And we want to make the other person pay that debt. So we do that by hurting them back, yelling at them, giving them the silent treatment, making them feel bad, or just watching and waiting and hoping that something bad happens to them, that God gets revenge on our behalf. Only after we see them suffer in some way do we sense that the debt has been paid? So what's forgiveness? Forgiveness means giving up the right to seek repayment for the one who harmed us. Forgiveness means we give up the right to revenge, either here or in the hereafter. We just say, like, the debt's been paid. Number 10, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. That means we don't express ourselves or vent at them in order to feel better. E. Stanley Jones tells of a woman who was really angry at her husband who said, "I think I'd be well if I could just once tell my husband to go to hell." Jones' comment was, perhaps she would have been relieved momentarily, but the resentments would fill up again and be ready for another spillover. Expression is not the remedy. It is merely dealing with a symptom instead of the disease. So what does it mean to have tolerance, pity, and patience? Well, tolerance really has to do with me. My own threshold to withstand pain or sorrow is raised. That means I stop being so easily offended. I remember once, gosh, I was probably about 11 years old. Someone at school told me they didn't like what I was wearing. And I actually felt like really bad. I felt like sick. Now, if someone tells me they don't like what I'm wearing, I could care less. Pity, the feeling of sorrow and compassion at the suffering and misfortune of others. What would it look like to have compassion on others, right? It would be to, again, put ourselves in their shoes and think of their lives, or maybe what triggered them to do what they did. Okay. And I want to say a few things about forgiving ourselves. People ask, should I put myself on a resentment inventory? The big book is silent on that. But if we resent ourselves, it's because we've done something wrong. We need to admit it, identify the defect, ask God to remove the defect and make our amends, and then trust that we are forgiven. God has set a process to be forgiven. We admit what we've done wrong, not vaguely. We admit it to God, to ourselves, another person, ask him to remove the defect and make amends if we've harmed someone. A lot of people say they have more trouble forgiving themselves than they do accepting God's forgiveness or forgiving others. But what really lies behind this idea of I can't forgive myself? According to Tim Keller, one of my favorite spiritual authors, when we say I can't forgive myself, it's really an indication of pride, because we're really saying that my judgment is more accurate than God's judgment. When I say, I know God has forgiven me, but I just can't forgive myself, I'm acting like my own judgment holds more weight than God's judgment. And the big book is really clear. Anytime we're sorry for what we've done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven. And I always like to close this talk on forgiveness with a story about forgiveness. I figure if she can forgive, anyone can. This is by Corrie ten Boom. It was in a church in Munich that I saw him, a balding, heavy-set man in a gray overcoat, a brown felt hat clutched between his hands. People were filing out of the basement room where I had just spoken, moving along the rows of wooden chairs to the door and at the rear. It was 1947, and I had come from Holland to defeated Germany with the message that God forgives. It was the truth they needed most to hear in that bitter, bombed out land. And I gave them my favorite mental picture. Maybe because the sea is never far from a Hollander's mind, I like to think that that's where forgiven sins were thrown. When we confess our sins, I said, God casts them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. The solemn faces stared back at me, not quite daring to believe. There were never questions after a talk in Germany in 1947. People stood up in silence collected their coats, in silence left the room. And that's when I saw him, working his way forward against the others. One moment I saw the overcoat and the brown hat, the next a blue uniform and a visored cap with its skull and crossbones. It came back with a rush. The huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic piles of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. Betsy, how thin you were. Betsy and I had been arrested for concealing Jews in our home during the Nazi occupation of Holland. This man had been a guard at Ravensbrück concentration camp where we were sent. Now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fraulein. How good it is to know that, as you say, all our sins are at the bottom of the sea. And I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than take his hand. He would not remember me, of course. How could he remember one prisoner among those thousands of women? But I remembered him and the leather crops swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard in there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fraulein. Again, his hand came out. Will you forgive me? And I stood there. I, whose sins had every day had to be forgiven, and I could not. Betsy had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply for the asking? It could not have been many seconds that I stood there, hand held out. But to me, it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men your trespasses, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses, I knew. And I knew it not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily experience. Since the end of the war, I had had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies were able also to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. God, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands. And then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. I want to be like Corrie ten Boom. And with that, I will pass.